There is no magic bullet, no silver bullet. There is no one-size-fits-all to creating an inclusive workplace. I'm Dr. Jonathan Ashong-Lamptey. I work with organizations to make them inclusive, and I'm on a mission to help a million people like you to make your workplace inclusive. Get your pen and paper ready, because I'm going to explain why promoting a one-size-fits-all approach to diversity is a huge mistake. This is the fourth in a series of shows about the 7 biggest mistakes that organizations make on their inclusion journey. 7 predictable errors that I consistently find in organizations. There's every chance that you're making this mistake and that it's compromising your inclusion efforts. Make sure you check out the other shows in this series, because it could make all the difference to your success. Let's face it, companies like yours are under a lot of pressure to become inclusive and increase their diversity. This means that there are massive incentives to find quick wins for anything that works or is seen to work when it comes to diversity and inclusion. In general, we're always looking for best practices in the way that we work and in the way that we think. I don't know about you, but if it's efficient and effective, then I want to know about it. And so do your leaders. However, what's efficient and effective for one may not be efficient and effective for another when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And that's why a one-size-fits-all approach often leads to thousands or even millions being wasted as a result of copying and pasting what they see others doing. To bring this to life, it's useful to think about this in 2 ways, from an external perspective and an internal perspective. Think of an external perspective as when an organization copies and pastes what they see other organizations doing. Think about it. Some of your competitors are winning awards. Their employees are being celebrated on lists that you haven't even heard about. Taking a look at what they're doing and getting some inspiration is going to be the go-to thing, particularly if you've got an inexperienced diversity and inclusion team. The problem with a one-size-fits-all approach is it means that organizations will attempt to duplicate initiatives or programs that they've seen in other organizations without tailoring it to their specific needs. The result is that they may often fail to implement them appropriately, or they don't get the same results that they've seen others get. Using the example that I said earlier, your employees may win inclusion awards and the like, but that should be a consequence of your inclusive culture, not a goal in and of itself. Knee-jerk reactions taken to mimic external organizations are less likely to be strategically aligned with the business, making it more difficult for employees and managers to buy into a compelling business case for these activities. And this is indicative of one of the 3 biggest problems that organizations experience on their inclusion journey, which is they lack a compelling business case for diversity for their specific organization. When I say this, I mean they lack a compelling way for diversity and inclusion to show up in their organization through lack of thought or lack of clarity. And this is self-evident, because if there was thought or clarity, they wouldn't need to copy what someone else was doing. They would be working on their own plans. The next thing to think about is an internal perspective to a one-size-fits-all approach. But before we do that, I want to talk about the importance of sharing. If you hear anything that you find interesting, then please share it with one other person that you think would find it useful. If you're finding this for the first time, make sure you check out the show notes. You can access these wherever you're listening to the podcast. The show notes have got details of all the reports and all the resources that are mentioned in the show. I've put this together for you so that you can go deeper into anything that we discuss here. Now let's get back to talking about a one-size-fits-all approach. We've talked about how a one-size-fits-all approach to diversity is one of the 7 biggest mistakes that organizations make on their inclusion journey. We've talked about the external perspective of copying and pasting from other organizations and how this leads to strategies that don't fit. Now let's talk about an internal perspective and what that looks like. What do I mean? Well, when it comes to a one-size-fits-all approach to diversity, this is the bit that I see and hear about from organizations. And this is when they treat each aspect of diversity as if it's the same. For example, in the UK, the Equality Act 2010, it protects individuals from discrimination, harassment and victimization with regards to 9 key characteristics, commonly known as the 9 protected characteristics. And these are age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex, and sexual orientation. Have you noticed that it doesn't cover class? That's a whole different show. As you may have guessed, the go-to for most organizations is to be seen to be doing something to support employees who have each of these characteristics. Typically, they'll deal with gender, or what the Equality Act called sex. So what most organizations will do in this case, they'll perhaps develop a leadership program for women. They'll hold an event for International Women's Day. They'll get some man on the board to say that they're feminists or they're gender allies, and they'll put that in a video that they put out on social. Maybe you even start an employee resource group. You're starting to get the picture, and you should recognize all of these things from where you work or companies that you know. Now, when you come to look at race, religion, or disability, you find that not everyone is up for saying that they're an ally. Perhaps they feel as if they don't know enough about it. Leadership programs for people with disabilities aren't as common as they should be, and some people look at them as tokenism, even more than women's leadership programs. What I'm saying is, the approach that you use for gender may not travel well when you apply it to other areas, but so many people still try to do exactly that. And when they realize that it doesn't work, that's often when they just stop. Copying and pasting without thought, without clarity, is not effective or efficient. This internal copy and paste approach isn't just about differences between categories of diversity, but there are also issues within categories of diversity. And a great example is what is commonly known as BAME in the UK, which means Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups. By the way, you'll notice that I don't use this term much. I tend to use the term minority groups. That has its problems as well, but regular listeners will have heard me talk about this, and I've also got shows where I explain why I use this term, and this will be in the show notes. BAME is used as a noun by individuals. I am BAME. I am a BAME person, or I am BAME. It's unlikely you'll hear me say this, but it is very common. Now, I understand it and the use in this way, in the same way as political blackness. It's used as a term of solidarity, of strength. Now, I'm not saying it's the same thing at all, but it does appear in some ways to function like political blackness. This means that an Indian person would say that they were black. A Chinese person would say that they were black. This may seem unusual when you hear this, but in the 70s, it was a way in which people united to fight against racism. The challenge here is that the work-based experiences of these different groups varies in a way that a one-size-fits-all approach becomes less useful. Research shows that there's an ethnic pay gap, an ethnic penalty. I made a video about this when I was a student, but essentially, all other things being equal, different ethnic groups are paid differently. At the top of the hierarchy were white Antipodeans, people from New Zealand, people from Australia who were white. They get paid more than white British people. And pretty close were people who were Chinese or Indian heritage. Then at the bottom were Black Africans, Black Caribbeans, Bangladeshis, and Pakistanis. Each of these groups have very different experiences in the workplace. All face potential disadvantage, but it shows up in different ways. They're subject to different stereotypes. For example, in the UK, Indians are overrepresented as doctors, whereas Pakistanis are overrepresented as cab drivers and pharmacists. And this implies that the approach required to engage any one of these groups may be very different to others. And therefore, there is no one-size-fits-all, and your activities within your organization need to reflect that. So let's wrap this up. What are the key messages here? There is no one-size-fits-all approach to diversity because 1. Copying and pasting what other companies are doing leads to strategies that aren't aligned with your own business. 2. Duplicating what works in one aspect of diversity is unlikely to work in all others. And 3. Treating employees as a homogeneous group is ineffective. So what do you think? Do you have a one-size-fits-all approach to diversity? Get in touch or leave a message. I would love to hear from you. If you've learned something from today's show, you should sign up to our insider list on our website. It's free and you can stay ahead of the pack and get the best of everything that I produce. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.